Welcome back to the Mad Genius Thesis, where we kind of like wrestle with this age-old question, is there a link between creative brilliance and mental illness?
Yeah, it's a fascinating question.
And today, we are diving deep into the life and work of Virginia Woolf.
One of the greats.
Absolutely one of the most celebrated and complex figures in 20th century literature.
For sure.
And our guide for this deep dive is Hermione Lee's comprehensive biography of Woolf.
A big one.
Yeah, it's a doorstop. And let me tell you, it doesn't shy away from the difficult stuff.
No, it doesn't.
In fact, right off the bat, we are confronted with a shocking detail from Woolf's childhood.
Yeah.
Sexual abuse at the hands of her half-brother, Gerald Duckworth.
Wow.
Yeah. I can only imagine the profound and lasting impact such an experience would have on anyone, let alone a young, developing mind.
It's certainly a disturbing start, and it immediately raises questions about how we interpret an artist's work through the lens of their personal experiences.
For sure.
I mean, while it's impossible to draw a direct causal link between this trauma and Woolf's later mental health struggles, we can't ignore its potential influence on her worldview, her relationships, and even her writing.
Absolutely. And speaking of her writing, what stood out to you in terms of how Woolf might have channeled these experiences, perhaps even subconsciously, into her work?
Well, one thing that struck me was the recurring motif of the Victorian house in Woolf's writing.
Okay.
Think about her famous essay, A Room of One's Own, where she argues for women's intellectual and creative freedom.
Right.
It's no coincidence that she uses the metaphor of a room, a space often associated with domesticity and confinement, to represent this need for liberation.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes you wonder if, for Woolf, the Victorian house represented not just a physical structure, but also a symbol of the societal constraints and expectations that she, as a woman and an artist, was constantly pushing against.
Exactly, and if we look closer at the actual Victorian household Woolf grew up
Okay.
in Talon House, we see a space that's both idyllic and oppressive. Lee describes it beautifully, this bustling summer home overlooking the bay, filled with family jests and intellectual discussions. But it was also a place steeped in Victorian traditions and expectations, particularly for women.
It's fascinating how a single location can hold such contrasting meanings.
It is.
Did those conflicting feelings about Talon House, or perhaps the Victorian era in general, manifest themselves in any other ways throughout her writing?
They certainly did. Woolf's complex relationship with femininity is woven throughout her novels.
Okay.
Her female characters often find themselves grappling with societal expectations that clashed with their own desires for independence and creative expression.
Interesting.
You see it in Clarissa Dalloway's struggle to balance her social obligations with her inner life, and in Lily Briscoe's determination to pursue her art despite the discouragement of those around her.
It sounds like Woolf was keenly aware of the limitations placed upon women in her time,
She was.
and she wasn't afraid to explore those limitations in her writing.
No, she wanted.
But it wasn't just societal pressures she was contending with. Right. Her own family history seems to have played a significant role in shaping her worldview as well.
You're absolutely right. The Stephen family tree is, to put it mildly, complicated.
Okay.
Woolf's father, Leslie Stephen, was a renowned literary critic, but also a man prone to depression and emotional fragility.
Oh, wow.
And her Aunt Millie sought solace in Quakerism after a series of personal setbacks, becoming a source of both support and irritation for Woolf.
Huh. Interesting.
Then there's the tragic case of her half-sister Laura, who was institutionalized due to what were then labeled as abnormalities.
It's heartbreaking to imagine young Virginia navigating this complex family dynamic, surrounded by such a mix of intellectual brilliance and mental fragility.
It is.
Did she ever write directly about her family or these experiences?
While she didn't explicitly detail her family's struggles in a biographical sense, many critics and scholars see echoes of these relationships and experiences in her novels. For example, To the Lighthouse is often interpreted as a reflection on her own childhood, with Mr. Ramsay bearing a striking resemblance to her father and Mrs. Ramsay embodying both the warmth and the constraints of her mother.
It's amazing how writers can transform personal experiences into something universal, creating characters and stories that resonate with readers across generations.
That is.
But in Woolf's case, it seems like this process of transformation was intertwined with her own mental health struggles, which, according to the biography, were quite severe.
Indeed, Woolf's breakdowns throughout her life were well documented, and Lee doesn't shy away from describing them in detail.
Right.
She experienced periods of intense manic energy, followed by crushing depressions, a cycle that was incredibly difficult for her and those around her.
And this is a time when mental illness was poorly understood and often stigmatized. What were the treatments like back then?
Unfortunately, the treatments available to Woolf at the time were often more harmful than helpful. She was subjected to rest cures, which essentially involved prolonged isolation and inactivity, and she was prescribed medications that had debilitating side effects.
It's a stark reminder of how far we've come in terms of understanding and treating mental illness.
It is.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But even amidst these struggles, Woolf managed to produce a remarkable body of work.
She did.
What was it about writing that allowed her to persevere, to find a voice and a sense of purpose?
Well, I think for Woolf, writing was more than just a profession.
That way?
It was a lifeline. It was a way for her to process her experiences, to explore her inner world, to create order out of chaos. And it was through writing that she found a sense of control and agency that was often denied to her in her personal life.
That makes perfect sense, and it speaks to the power of art to transcend personal struggles, to connect us to something larger than ourselves, and to offer solace and meaning, even in the face of immense challenges.
Absolutely. Yeah, it really is. And it's fascinating how she was able to translate those incredibly personal struggles into works that resonate with so many people. One of the things Lee highlights is the concept of looking glass shame, which Woolf experienced as a child. It's this constant feeling of evaluating oneself through the eyes of others, worrying about how you're perceived.
Oh, wow.
Given the abuse she suffered and the strictness of her upbringing, I can only imagine how intensely she felt the shame.
It makes you wonder if her writing was a way to confront and maybe even overcome that feeling.
Yeah.
By creating characters who were also grappling with her own sense of self. Perhaps she was able to find some sort of catharsis or understanding.
That's a really insightful point, and it ties into something else. Lee discusses the impact of societal expectations on Woolf's work.
Okay.
Remember, we're talking about the Victorian era, a time when women were largely confined to the domestic sphere.
Right.
Their intellectual and creative aspirations were often stifled, and their voices were rarely heard.
Yeah.
Woolf, with her sharp intellect and burning desire to write, must have felt this acutely.
Absolutely. And we see that tension play out in so many of her novels.
We do.
Her female characters are constantly pushing against the boundaries of what's considered acceptable for women.
Right.
They yearn for something more, a space to express themselves fully, both intellectually and creatively.
And that brings us back to the concept of the Victorian house as a symbol.
Okay.
It wasn't just a place of physical confinement for women, it was also a representation of the societal structures that limited their opportunities and their dreams. In a way, Woolf's writing becomes a form of rebellion against this confinement.
It's like she's building her own rooms, her own spaces, where women can be free to think, to create, to exist on their own terms.
Exactly.
But this rebellion isn't just limited to themes. It also extends to her writing style, doesn't it?
Precisely. Woolf was a pioneer of modernist literature, and her signature stream of consciousness style is a prime example of this.
Okay.
Instead of adhering to traditional narrative structures, she delves into the minds of her characters, capturing the fluidity and complexity of their thoughts and feelings. Some critics have even suggested that this style mirrors the fragmented and often chaotic nature of mental illness itself.
That's an intriguing connection. It makes you wonder if, in a way, Woolf was using her writing to dismantle not only societal structures, but also the very conventions of language and storytelling.
It's possible.
And let's not forget the role of the Hogarth Press,
Right.
the publishing house she founded with her husband Leonard in 1917.
Yes.
This venture gave her a level of creative control and autonomy that was rare for women at the time.
It did.
It allowed her to publish her own work and the work of other groundbreaking writers, further solidifying her position as a literary innovator.
It's incredible to think about the sheer determination it must have taken for her to achieve all of this while battling such severe mental health challenges.
Yeah, we've talked about the treatments she received, which were often ineffective and even harmful.
Right.
Can you elaborate on the specifics of her breakdowns and how they manifested?
Lee paints a vivid picture of Woolf's mental health journey, drawing on letters, diaries, and accounts from those closest to her, including Leonard. She experienced periods of intense mania characterized by racing thoughts, heightened energy, and insomnia.
Wow.
These episodes were often followed by crushing depressions, where she would withdraw from the world, struggle with feelings of worthlessness, and even contemplate suicide.
It's heartbreaking to think of her going through those extremes, especially in a time when mental illness was so misunderstood.
Yeah, it is.
And yet, amidst all of this, she continued to write, to create, to leave an indelible mark on the literary world.
It speaks to the incredible resilience of the human spirit, the power of art to provide solace and meaning even in the darkest of times.
Yeah.
And it challenges us to reconsider the romanticized notion of the tortured artist.
Okay.
While Woolf's struggles undoubtedly shaped her work, they were not the source of her genius.
Right.
Her brilliance existed in spite of her illness, not because of it.
That's such an important point. We can't reduce her entire legacy to her mental health challenges.
Yeah.
But we also can't ignore the impact they had on her life and her writing.
Exactly. It's a delicate balance. We need to approach her story with both empathy and critical distance, recognizing the complexity of her experience and the multifaceted nature of her genius.
And I think that's a key takeaway from this deep dive, understanding the nuances of the mad genius thesis.
Yeah.
We're not trying to draw simplistic connections between mental illness and creativity, but rather exploring the intricate ways in which personal experiences, including mental health challenges, can shape an artist's worldview and their art.
Absolutely. And as we move into the final part of our discussion, I'd love to delve into some specific examples of how Woolf's unique perspective, shaped by both her brilliance and her struggles, manifests in her writing.
Okay, so let's jump into those examples. What specific passages or works highlight this connection between Woolf's unique perspective and her writing?
Well, one that really stands out is in her novel, Mrs. Dalloway. Remember how Clarissa, the protagonist, is preparing for a party, and her thoughts are like darting back and forth between the present moment and memories from her past?
Right, yeah.
The narrative shifts seamlessly between these different temporal planes, right? It mirrors the way our minds often jump between thoughts and associations, especially when we're experiencing anxiety or heightened emotional states.
It's like Woolf is giving us a glimpse into the inner workings of Clarissa's mind,
Exactly.
allowing us to experience her anxieties and her joys, her fleeting thoughts and her deep-seated memories all at once.
It's really powerful.
It's a truly immersive experience for the reader, and it's definitely a hallmark of her stream of consciousness style.
Precisely. And this technique isn't limited to Mrs. Dalloway. You see it in To the Lighthouse as well, where the narrative flows between the perspectives of different characters, capturing the fluidity of their thoughts and the interconnectedness of their relationships. It's almost as if Woolf is suggesting that our minds are not isolated entities, but rather part of a larger interconnected web of consciousness.
That's a fascinating idea. It makes me think about how mental illness can sometimes make us feel isolated and alone, trapped inside our own heads.
Right.
But Woolf's writing seems to suggest that even in our most fragmented and chaotic states, we're still connected to others, still part of something larger than ourselves.
And that's a really powerful message, especially for those who struggle with mental health challenges.
Yeah.
It reminds us that even when we feel most alone, we're not truly isolated. There's a shared humanity, a common thread of experience that connects us all.
And it's also worth noting that Woolf didn't shy away from portraying the darker aspects of mental illness in her writing.
No, she didn't.
In her novel The Waves, for example, the character of Rhoda struggles with intense feelings of alienation and despair and ultimately takes her own life.
Right.
It's a deeply moving and unsettling portrayal of the devastating impact mental illness can have.
And it's a reminder that Woolf's writing wasn't simply a romanticized exploration of the creative mind.
Right.
She grappled with the very real and often painful consequences of mental illness, both for herself and for those around her.
So as we kind of wrap up this deep dive into the life and work of Virginia Woolf,
Yeah.
what can we say about her relationship to the mad genius thesis? Was her creative brilliance fueled by her mental illness? Or did it exist in spite of it?
I think the answer, as with most things in life, is complex and nuanced.
Right.
We can't deny that Woolf's experiences with mental illness shaped her perspective and influenced her writing.
Sure.
But it's crucial to avoid reducing her entire legacy to her struggles.
Yeah.
Her genius was multifaceted, encompassing her sharp intellect, her mastery of language, her innovative writing style, and her profound empathy for the human condition.
Yeah.
Mental illness was a part of her story, but it wasn't the whole story.
Well said. And I think that's a valuable lesson for us all as we continue to explore the mad genius thesis. It's about understanding the complexities of the human experience, recognizing that creativity can arise from a multitude of sources, and appreciating the unique contributions of artists who, like Woolf, dared to challenge conventions and push the boundaries of what's possible.
And perhaps most importantly, it's about approaching these conversations with empathy, sensitivity, and a willingness to learn from the diverse experiences of others.
Beautifully put. To our listener, thank you for joining us on this exploration of Virginia Woolf's life and work. We hope this deep dive has provided you with new insights and sparked your curiosity to learn more. And remember, the conversation doesn't end here. Keep exploring. keep questioning, and keep seeking out the stories that illuminate the complexities of the human experience.